Okay, it's too brute. Now he's playing the bird defense. So against the bird, a really good move in this position is actually bishop g4, which is sort of like the Trumpowski. Now, what is the idea of bishop g4? As in many of these openings, you want to get the bishop outside of the pawn chain before closing things up with e6. Now we're going to develop the knight to d7, and I'll explain why not knight c6 after the game. We take the knight. Notice that he hasn't developed anything. What pawn break do we want to prepare here for black? What is the key pawn break to prepare? And can we play it immediately? Yeah, so we want to play e5. Now, the Sam Shanklin question, as I always say, can we play e5 immediately? Now, a lot of you are thinking no, because of queen takes d5. But remember, white's made a lot of pawn moves near his king, which changes the rules of engagement for the center. So if we play e5 and he takes the pawn, we can deliver a very nasty check on h4, force his king to move, and then we can castle long. We'll have a huge lead in development. His queen will be caught on the crossfire, and we've only sacrificed a pawn. So it's very important to always follow through on this kind of question. He's gone bishop b5, pinning our knight. That's why we put it on d7, so that we could play c6 and blunt the bishop's control, also enhancing our control of the center. Now we're just going to continue developing. Let's continue developing. We don't need to do anything about the central tension. We don't need to push. By keeping the center open, we are allowing ourselves to exploit our lead in development. Where do we want to put the f8 bishop? Where do we want to put, or do we want to develop the bishop? Do we have an even better move? We actually do. So people are right, but we have a better move. How can I find it? I want everybody to notice that he's played h3. h3 has created a hole on g3, which is something you should notice. What can we put on that hole? We can put a knight there. How can we put a knight there? We can centralize it. This also creates the threat of queen h4, which basically compels him to castle, but that castles right into a fork. We win an exchange, and we'll basically be winning right out of the opening. If he doesn't castle, we can decide between knight g3 and a nasty check on h4, which I just mentioned. So what I want people to understand is that when you're developing your pieces, you don't want to just put your head down and develop automatically. You want to also detect the holes in your opponent's position. Sometimes you can move a piece more than once in the opening if it means that you're exploiting a specific deficiency in your opponent's position. Okay, let's see what he does. Oh, I needed to get more ice cream. Okay. He's made a good move. Queen h5. Now, let's unpack this move for a second. He's just attacking our knight. If we go knight g3, he takes one knight with check and wins the other one. So let's buttress the d6 knight by playing bishop d6 now. Sorry, the e5 knight. And yet again, we're threatening knight g3. I don't see a good defense for him. If he castles, then once again, we go knight g3. Notice that the e5 knight... Okay, so he's gone here. Now, let's try to understand what our priorities are in this position. Our number one priority, the move that's going to devastate him like no other, is if we can manage to put a queen on h4, right? I know a lot of people are looking at discoveries. One way of doing that is to go queen to f6. By threatening the check on f2, we are going to force his queen back, and then we're going to relocate our queen to h4. What's another way of trying to get our queen to h4? What's another way of trying to dislodge his queen? Let's go queen f6, but I want people in the meantime to think about that question. We could have gone g6. Could have gone g6, attacking the queen, forcing it back, and then putting our queen on h4. That would have been a little bit more precise. But this move is perfectly good enough. Okay, so he ignores the checkmate, and the game is over. So that's why I don't recommend these kinds of openings to players, even in the intermediate range. And we're 1500. So, just to emphasize, g6 would have attacked his queen. If he sticks the queen on h6, actually that would have been a little bit nasty. Well, now we can play queen f6, and he can't even stop us from coming to f2. If he tries to go g4, what move does he now allow? And I'm sure this is not the only win, by the way, but as an example, what move is now possible? We can go knight f3, and we can take his rook, and we're threatening checkmate. That's unstoppable because he has neglected the development of his kingside. Okay, we'll analyze this game later. In the meantime, let's continue. Next game. Okay. Let's go e4. And we have been playing several different openings. Now, h6 is not a good move. And the reaction that we've had against such moves is to prepare the control of the center with c3, which is what we're going to do here. Preparing the move d4, which we're going to play anyway. I don't care that he's got knight f6. We're just going to control the center. Thank you, Dirtbite, for the tier 1. Okay, so how do we solve the problem now of the e4 pawn? We have an intermediate move that we can make in order to solve the problem of the e4 pawn. By the way, we could sacrifice it. That would be fine because it would open the e-file for us. And the common approach in this position is to go e5. Now, here I know a lot of people would rush to say we should take on d4, but let's think about this a little bit deeper. What is the drawback of the move queen e7? The drawback of this move is that it puts the king and the queen on the same file. So we actually now want the e-file to be opened. And we want him, in effect, to take on e5 because that would set up a skewer. Nor do we need to go queen e2. We don't need to defend this pawn. We simply need to prepare for the opening of the e-file by preparing to position a rook on e1. And we do that by killing many birds with one stone. We castle. In order to save his skin, he's going to have to move his knight from f6. Now and only now do we take on d4. Notice that his knight from g4 is now stranded. It has no squares. So to add insult to injury, we're going to just win his knight here. Now, a good player would play h5, but that doesn't really solve any of the problems inherent in his position. We can still take on g4, by the way, in that case. Okay, well, now he opens the f-file for us. Now, as I always say, when we win material, the most common mistake that people make is to forget the fundamentals. They forget to complete their development, and they run into problems. But let's not forget to complete our development. Let's do that. Let's put in the time to complete our development. Let's go knight to c3. And once he castles, we can also centralize our knight with knight to d5. That's a good move. And then develop our bishop. Pile up on a lot of these weaknesses that he's created on his king side. Thank you, TJ Rink, for the prime. Appreciate it, my man. Appreciate it, my man. Okay, so let's centralize our knight. Okay, hopefully this is making sense to people. Another thing that we could consider doing here is to go knight f6 check and try to take his bishop out of the equation so that his king gets even weaker. But there's no need for such extravagancies. We can just pile up on his h6 pawn. This is sort of a classic method of attacking in such positions. Okay. But now the temptation to play knight f6 has been raised because his queen is no longer guarding that square. Again, what I want to emphasize to people is simplicity, like the power of playing in a very simple fashion. So we're actually not going to go knight f6, even though that's the move I would have played in a game. We're just going to continue with our sort of conventional plan here. And only now, well, okay, so still we're not going to play knight f6. What would be the simple way to accumulate pressure on his king? On his king's side, let's say. But there's one more piece that we haven't deployed yet. Let's deploy it. Let's deploy the last remaining piece, which is the rook. I know that this might strike people as a very formulaic way of playing, and like, okay, where is the checkmate, where is the sacrifices? But trust me, in order to master Dania style, you have to master the fundamentals of attacking, which is to say, the art of bringing all the pieces in very patiently and doing the fundamental things very well. Okay. Now it's time, it's the wax on, wax off method. Now it's time for some tactics. This king on h7 is subject to a discovered attack. Sorry, to a check by the knight on g5. But this check in and of itself is a knight blunder. He just takes her knight. But it could be used as a discovery down the f-file. By combining these two observations, we see the move bishop takes f7, distracting his rook onto a square where it can be picked off with a discovery. Now, some of you are looking at this and saying, okay, I get it. Why are you giving up two pieces for a rook? Isn't that good for black? Well, no, because look at his king. His king is now encircled by our pieces. We're still up in exchange. On the next move, we're going to take on g5 and basically checkmate him. So how did I see the move bishop takes f7? What made me find it? It's the fact that I saw that we have a check on g5. And one of the properties of this check is that it opens up the f-file. So if he has something on the f-file that's vulnerable, we can give this check in order to pick it off, right? You have to do this kind of observation all the time. You have to constantly notice these sorts of things. Otherwise, you're not going to find these types of tactics. And you know, there were many formative books that caused me to raise my awareness of this. One little-known book that I can recommend to people is called Chess Middle Game Combinations by Peter Romanovsky, originally in Russian. Romanovsky was a early 20th century chess master, and he wrote a fantastic book on seeing tactics. So hopefully this game made sense to everybody. Let's play one more, and then we're going to analyze. Let's play one more blitz game, and then we're going to analyze all three. We're going to play Apache. Same rating as us right now. Okay, so he's playing the Sicilian. We're going to play the open Sicilian, which I've been doing. Okay, so he plays e5, which is called the Kalashnikov variation. It's a pretty common variation of the Sicilian, and black strikes in the center immediately, but the drawbacks of this move are pretty evident, right? The drawbacks of this move are that it weakens these two squares, principally. Square on d6 and square on d5, and we have to maneuver our pieces in order to exploit those. And so knight b5 is the main line here. And then we're going to bring up the other knight in order to access d5, the other weak square that has been created. This is all theory, by the way. This is all theory. And we have transposed into what's called the Sveshnikov. Now, what we don't want is for our knight to be easily dislodged from d5. We want to keep this knight on t5, but what's preventing us from doing that is his knight on f6. So we're going to develop our bishop to eliminate it. Thank you, Socrates. Now, and I'm sort of trying to explain why the theory is a theory. This knight on a3, everybody should notice, is very misplaced, right? It has no prospects. So what we're going to go about doing is giving this knight some prospect. Particularly, we want to maneuver it to somewhere civilized. So we're going to go c3 in order to deploy this knight through c2. It's not ideal, but at least our knight is now doing something. Okay, so this is the main line of the Sveshnikov. So far, he's been playing all the theoretical moves. Kudos to him. Now, the other thing that people should notice here is c4 is also a move, by the way, but it would weaken the d4 square. But c4 is a theoretical move as well. The other thing that I want people to notice here is that there's a pawn on b5, which is sort of sticking out like a sore thumb. How do we go about undermining or perhaps trying to exploit the weakness of this pawn? It's a very typical idea. You'll see this also in the Ruy Lopez. You'll see this in a lot of openings. Yeah, we go a4 to try to break up this pawn and also deploy the rook via the a file. It's always nice when you don't have to move a piece and it already participates in the game. I have read parts of Reassess Your Chess, although I wouldn't say that I've read the whole thing. Okay, so let's see what he comes up with here. All right, so I think the theory, maybe he takes the knight here, I don't know. Then we'll take with a queen, and the queen ably performs the task previously fulfilled by the knight. Maybe I should have supported my knight by playing knight c to e3. That's another way of doing it. He takes, and so will we. And by taking, he's also given our bishop a very nice square. Where can our bishop now go to in order to support the knight? Well, and c9, to answer your question, we were waiting for the square to open up for the bishop. Development is not something that should be rushed all the time. It's a priority, but you should make sure that you're giving your pieces good squares before you're developing them. Now, he's given up a pawn on a6. I think we're just going to snag that one, if you don't mind. That's a free pawn in my book. Now, there is a little bit of pressure down the a file. We should be careful about that, particularly because this rook is unprotected. But what I'm seeing is that I can later move my bishop back to b5. That bishop is going to simultaneously defend the rook on a4. So while this is something to keep an eye on, it's not something to be overly concerned about. Okay, so he takes, we take, as we know. I don't really see where he's going with this. I don't really see... Well, he could have taken with a rook, but again, I don't see a point to shy away from this tension. I don't see even how he attacks this bishop another time. And even if he does, we have many ways to defend it. We can defend it with our queen, which is what we're going to do. We're going to drop the queen back in order to lend some additional support to this bishop. This guy is good, though. He's not going down without a fight, but you can see that the cracks are beginning to show. Okay, and now is a great time to show why we've deployed this knight to c2. There's a move here that I call a glue move. There's a move that glues together all of the disparate parts of white's position. It stops the queen from attacking b2. It lends further support to the bishop. And it just glues everything together very nicely. That's the move knight to b4, as some of you are pointing out. This is a glue move. This guy is good. As I said, this guy is very good. He's underrated. But white is definitely better here. Okay, b2 was also hanging. Yeah, that's important. Now, f2 is not hanging because it's simply protected by the king. Let's see what he comes up with here. Okay. Now we have time for a simple prophylaxis. What is the point of this move? Where is the knight going? How do we stop it from getting there? 2 questions. Let's answer them both. The knight's going to f4, obviously. How do we prevent it? By going g3. Right? This is simple prophylaxis. A good observation is that d5 square is also free. We don't want to rush putting our knight there. Remember that the knight on b4 is fulfilling the crucial role of defending b2. Thanks. Okay, he's gone back. Excellent. Now we can complete our development by castling. Okay, so he's gone f5. Now, you know, a lot of people would be worried about this move. Oh my god, he's opening the f-file. But let's take a second and understand the drawbacks inherent in this move. What is the drawback of pushing the f-pawn when you're castled? Well, one of them is that you, by definition, weaken this diagonal. So what we need to notice here is that this check on c4 might be very strong in a couple of moves. Let's take on f5. If he takes back, we're going to make a discover check, and his knight is going to be lost. I think he's noticed that. So he's going to have to give away another pawn. He can't recapture on f5. Well, he did, but this knight is defended by the rook. This rook also defends the other rook, which means it's overloaded. By giving the check, we are exposing the tension of the rooks. Boom. And boom, and we're up a knight, and we're up a pawn, and we're winning. So the most important moment in the game was g3. This made him frustrated. It made him frustrated. He got impatient trying to create counterplay, and he fell apart very, very quickly. Now he realizes it, but it's too late. Okay, let's capture the knight. And now, by the way, if you notice the bishop and the queen, they can combine in a battery, threaten checkmate, and the bishop on f6 is going to be lost as well, because to defend against it, he's got to give it up. Okay. The Art of Attacking the King. I'm not sure what book that's referring to. Okay, he runs. We're going to take it. How do we continue harassing the king after it moves to f7? Which piece can we deploy to attack the king, and how can we deploy it? Also notice, by the way, the move knight c5 could potentially be a fork. Yeah, bishop c4 or bishop g6 are both good. Now, our goal here is to get the king onto e7, because that is a forkable square. So we need to kind of assess all of the checks that we can make here, including retreating moves. In such positions, people often miss retreating moves, and they are the art. They are the glue that makes the attack run. Bishop on g6 is cutting the king off from f7. As many of you are seeing, good job, guys. Queen h3 forces the king onto e7. That is literally the only move. And that king walks right into the fork with the knight. We win this queen, and we win the game. So the game is over. Good. Very, very good. Okay. And you can see that we didn't do anything extraordinary. We played the theoretical moves, and he collapses quite quickly. So, very good. Whoa, Kelly from Sales gifting 5 subs to the community. Stoke in the fire. Really, really appreciate that. Legendary Matrix, Gian Lukil, Jerbach, and Kendall JC, One Temper, all getting subs. Thank you so much. And 3477, boys and girls. Incredible. Really big fan of the glue metaphors. I like glue moves. Okay, so let's which I think we actually explained the games quite well. I don't think there needs to be any over-explaining to do. But let's just look at this game for a second. Now, okay. So boom, boom, this is all very simple. Now the move c4 here, some people were suggesting, is also very fashionable theoretically. But the issue is that it weakens the d4 square. So that move does have a drawback. Its strength is that you get your development out faster because c4 occurs with tempo. You attack the pawn on b5 simultaneously. I made a lot of knight moves in the early going. I did, but he also made a lot of concessions which allowed me to violate some of these rules. In particular, he weakened the square on d5. You know, when you get to that level of 1500, you have to understand that these rules that you follow in a very linear fashion when you're a beginner, you start to bend them very slowly. And one of the rules you start to bend is that you can allow yourself to move the same piece more than once, because opening theory starts playing a pretty big role. And modern opening theory involves a lot of violation of rules, if that makes sense. So it's sort of a negotiation between continuing to follow principles but understanding when to violate them at the same time. Yeah, let's check the... Oh, so somebody said we had high accuracy in this game. Let's see. I'm curious now. People were supplying the moves, so I didn't do much. Yeah. 99%. Let's go. So simple rules, simple logic produces good chess. Okay. Well, people were supplying the moves to me. I wasn't really doing much. Okay, must be cheating. That's right. Let's continue though. One more. Pau Mandato, 1577, and let's once again play the Sicilian in the Accelerated Dragon, which is the opening that I recommend to people in the 1500 range. This is a move we've seen often, knight takes c6. It's a mistake, because he gives us greater mobility in the center, greater ease of organizing d5. Now, we have some problems to solve. The rook is hanging, which means we should develop our knight and defend the rook at the same time. Yeah, this is a theoretical line where they can go e6, and it seems like a lot is going on. Oh my god, have we blundered? He's discovering the attack on the rook. In reality, this is one of those lines where if you look a little bit deeper, you find that black is doing completely fine, because remember, he doesn't have anything out yet. So we're just going to go f6 to block the queen's attack on the rook. I know I said never play f6, but there's a reason why this is an exemption, and I'll explain that in greater depth after the game. Now, one of the reasons why f6 is okay here is because the move f6 prepares what central advance? What central advance is now possible with tempo, because we've played f6. Yeah, the move e5 is now possible. Thank you, T Brown 03 for the prime. Yeah, this is now possible. And not only is this possible, but this is really good because we open up the bishop as well. And where should we put this bishop? We can put it on d6, for example. We can also deploy our queen to b6, so it's actually staring at some pawns. And potentially it's also permitting us to play bishop e6 to lend some support on this weakened diagonal. That's exactly what we're going to do here in order to support this knight on d5. Hopefully this makes sense. Okay, now what should we take with? And both recaptures are fine, but according to sort of our way of thinking, let's take with a pawn. Here we go with this again. Let's take with a pawn, because now we have a really nice pawn center. We're going to castle to attack to defend f6. We're going to castle to defend f6. Okay, bishop h6. So it seems like he's tossing us around, but he's actually not. He's just sort of... He's making these moves that look active, but the reality is we have control over the center. He has these two pieces that don't really do anything. They're just sort of sitting there, because our king side is perfectly well defended. Where should we put our rook? Well, we don't need to play g5. We don't need to kick his queen away from a square where it's already not doing much. Okay, c4. Okay, now we can take on c4 and make a weakness. Or we can push d4 and we can expand our central control, which is what we're going to do. And then one idea is to play f5. And, well, g5 does trap the bishop, but you've got to be careful about weakening your own king. Okay, now... Well, there's a couple of ways to approach this position. We want to play e4. We can't do that yet. So the simplest way to approach this position would be... The simplest way to approach this position would be just to play f5 and prepare e4. It's a little bit risky to introduce some more weaknesses in our king side, but there's just no way that he can exploit them. There's just no way that he can exploit them. And let's see what he ends up doing. But e4, d3 is just a massive threat. Yeah, he doesn't actually stop us from playing e4. That's partially why we positioned our queen on b6, that it guards d4 and allows us to prepare d3. Okay. How he could exploit it. Yeah, maybe after the game. Yeah, we could have also played a5 to sort of slow down the progression of his pawns, but there's no need for that yet. All right, let's continue our pawn storm. No need to stop. Okay. So there are some tactics here. Takes, rook d2, e3. Yeah, so this is where the tactics come in. and the concrete calculation comes in. So we have two ways to capture. We can capture this bishop, or we could capture this bishop. The move that we should start with is the move that may yield the most benefits if it works, which is d takes e2. Attacking the rook has to go to d2. And in that position, those of you who want to practice their visualization, what is the move after d takes e2, rook e2 to harass that rook and force material losses? The move is going to be e3, right? Because if he takes e3, we're going to fork his king and his rook. This is where concreteness transcends general appearances. It looks like, why are we partying? Okay, so he gives up the bishop straight away without a fight. Now we're up a piece. And now the win is very straightforward. We can, let's put our rook on a good square on an open file. And now we can go about playing down the d file. We can triple on the d file and then focus on putting a rook on d1, which is going to be the simplest strategy. And we're in great shape here. We're in great shape here. And the royal triple. But we would move our queen away from d6 in order to set up the possibility of putting a rook on d1. Okay. Yeah, load up Alekine's gun. That's also possible. Okay. Here comes Alekine gun. The queen isn't doing anything. And this is not mate because he takes and he goes rook e1. So we should be careful about that. But we can trade queens. How can we force the trade of queens? How can we force the trade of queens? It was not mate before either. Because he could have gone rook e1. No. It was not mate. Guys, I did not miss mate. Because queen d1, he has rook e1 immediately. It's not mate, guys. I saw that. Trust me, I'm not going to miss a back rank mate like this. Yeah. So this forces the trade of queens. Because if his queen leaves the rook, then we simply take his rook. And why is it good to trade queens here? Because we have control over a file. And okay, now we're going to play e3 just to cement this passed pawn. We can play f4 later. Yeah, so now we're going to go rook d1. He's got to go rook e1. Otherwise, he's checkmated. Now it's a good idea to do this because we trade rooks. And we've got to be a little bit careful. Our top priority is to support the pawn on e3. So we're going to go g5. Okay, we're going to carve out some real estate here. And we're going to go after this pawn. And our secondary idea is to position the rook behind the passed pawn in order to preserve it. Okay, let's move our bishop to f7 so that we can meet king f3 with bishop h5 check and dislodge the king from the pawn. Also, that bishop's going to guard the e2 square, so we're going to be able to push our pawn to e2. I mean, I'm not really explaining my moves here on a granular level because there's many ways of winning such a position. And I'm just making pretty straightforward moves. Okay, he's good though. He's playing resiliently. And in order to win this, we need to involve our king. So let's go king g7. Also, if he goes h4, it's checkmate, which is kind of funny. He actually might go h4. Thank you, John Sanood. Appreciate it. Glad you're enjoying it. Most of this will be on YouTube. I don't put every single speedrun game on YouTube because that would be cumbersome. Now we go h6. How should we follow up after king h4? What should we do? What should we do? We should take on f4, step back to e4, and then we have connected passers. Okay, we're not going to let his rook take. We're going to go bishop h5. And, yeah, now it's very simple. Because the bishop has been charged with control over the pawn, we can just move the rook to d1. And we can force the trade of rooks, and then finally we can grind. Okay, so he takes. That's fine. Rook b1 takes, and now we can just push our pawn forward. That's fine. I wonder who's going to win the pawn race. We actually have to be careful. f2, c7, we can't stop his pawn. Of course, that would still be completely winning, but we've got to be careful about that. Okay, we can give up this pawn and win the other one. It really doesn't matter. We can just go around. He should resign. He should resign. Yeah, and he does. Okay, great. That was an interesting game. Let me see. So I think one of the keys to the kingdom here was this move f6. You know, you always say never play f6, but f6 does create certain weaknesses on our king side. But on the other hand, it supports the building of a center. And this is one of those other things I mentioned about weighing the pros and cons of a particular move. And deciding that because he doesn't have enough stuff developed, we can get away with something like this. Okay? So it's always important to weigh the pros and cons of everything that you're doing. Particularly the move f6. So here we just can complete our development. The move queen b6 deploys our queen onto a really nice square. What also makes this move good is the fact that he cannot put his bishop on e3 because that square is protected. And yeah, we're in fantastic shape here. Now we put the other bishop on e6. We don't want to give away the knight on d5. That's our strongest piece. And basically that was what won us the game, I think. Yeah, and then we just prepared the pawn storm, and then we found the tactics. If he had gone rook d2 in this position, we would have gone e3, and he's in huge trouble because his rook... Well, I guess he has rook d4, maybe, but then maybe we play f4, actually. And again, we separate his queen from his rook. So this is just very, very good position for us. We could have also taken the other bishop and kept our pawn chain. But this is sort of plays to the concept of transformation of the advantage. So anyways, guys,